It began with a moment so ordinary that no one on that plane could. V predicted the storm that was coming. Calm. It began with a moment so ordinary, no one on that plane could have predicted the storm that was coming. A calm, well-dressed black man stepped into first class, holding a simple boarding pass and a quiet confidence that only comes from years of building something extraordinary. But before he could even settle into his seat, whispered assumptions spread through the cabin like sparks on dry grass. A flight attendant approached him with a forced smile, the kind that hides suspicion, and asked to recheck his ticket. Passengers glanced over their shoulders, some curious, some judgmental, and within seconds, the dignified CEO found himself treated like an imposter in a space he had paid for. The humiliation was subtle, but sharp questions about his identity, doubting looks, an invitation to stand aside while others boarded freely. The airline staff believed they were dealing with someone trying to sneak into first class. As they removed him from his seat, he didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't remind them who he was, simply watched, observing every word, every assumption, every layer of bias unfolding before him. What the airline didn't know, what no one in that cabin knew, was that this man, who they had just embarrassed publicly, was the founder and CEO of a tech empire valued at $1.8 billion. A company that silently powered major airports around the world. This flight wasn't just another trip. It was supposed to take him to a high-level meeting involving the very systems that this airline depended on. Yet here he was, treated like he didn't belong, judged by appearance rather than achievement. The irony was painful, but the consequences would be far greater than anyone imagined. Because while the staff thought they were disciplining a passenger, they were unknowingly disrespecting the man whose influence could shake the foundation of their airline. He stayed quiet not because he was powerless, but because he wanted to see how far the bias would go, how deep the assumptions ran. And in those quiet moments of humiliation, a chain of events had already begun, events that would expose a flaw in the system, challenge corporate culture, and force the airline to confront a truth far bigger than one mistaken judgment. Minutes later, a single phone call would change everything. The terminal had been buzzing with the usual pre-flight tension as the CEO approached the gate. His mind focused on the high-stakes meeting waiting for him in New York. He handed his first class boarding pass to the attendant with a polite nod, unaware that this ordinary moment would become the spark that ignited a much larger fire. As he stepped onto the aircraft, a few passengers glanced at him not with admiration, but with the quiet, questioning expressions of people who had already made their assumptions. He placed his leather bag in the overhead compartment, feeling the weight of the long years of hard work that had brought him here. But just as he settled into his spacious seat, a flight attendant approached abruptly, her smile tight, her tone dripping with forced politeness. She asked for his boarding pass again, tilting her head in a way that suggested doubt, not procedure. Her eyes scanned him, not the ticket, and within moments, she claimed there was an issue and asked him to stand. Passengers stared, some whispering. He felt the sting of humiliation, but responded calmly, choosing dignity over confrontation. As he stepped aside, he realized this wasn't a simple mistake. It was a painful reminder of how appearances still decide treatment. Standing awkwardly near the galley, CEO watched the flight attendant bring his ticket to his supervisor, whispering anxiously. Their glances shifted repeatedly toward him, each look an unspoken accusation. The supervisor approached, arms crossed, her face stern, as if preparing for conflict instead of conversation. "Sir, we need to verify your identity," she said, emphasizing verify like he had attempted something deceitful. He handed over his ID without hesitation, watching her eyes widen slightly at the expensive business card attached to his wallet. Yet she said nothing. Instead, she questioned him further, asking why he was assigned to first class, demanding an explanation that no other passenger had been asked to give. Others peeked from behind seats, some judgmental, some curious, all adding to the growing sense of public embarrassment. He felt a familiar IKEA mixture of disappointment, anger, and exhaustion that comes from being disrespected yet expected to remain composed. But even in that moment, he kept his posture straight, his tone neutral, refusing to give them any reason to twist the situation. When they insisted he leave the first-class cabin until verification was complete, he simply nodded and stepped aside. The quietness of his response only deepened their confusion, but he had his reasons. As he stood outside the premium cabin, the CEO took a slow breath, letting the frustration settle into stillness rather than anger. The staff moved quickly now, whispering, radioing managers, and coordinating with the gate as if handling a security risk instead of a ticketed passenger. One crew member even asked him if he might have picked up the wrong seat by mistake, a phrase coated with subtle condescension. He wanted to respond to correct them, but chose silence instead. It's not because he felt powerless, but because he wanted to witness the full extent of their assumptions. In his pocket, his phone buzzed. Reminders for the meeting. Messages from board members. A notification from the airport authority system that his company managed.
Ow.
The irony made him exhale softly. Finally, after 20 long minutes of unnecessary interrogation, he quietly stepped aside, lifted his phone, and called his crew. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't mention the humiliation. We simply said, "We have a problem with the airline system. Please escalate immediately." His crew understood instantly. That single call created ripples through the company's network. Within minutes, executives were alerted, internal communications blew up, and the airline's senior management realized something was very, very wrong. High above the aircraft, the airline's operations center lit up with sudden alerts. Messages flooded in from airport security, corporate offices, and IT leads. The CEO's name appeared in multiple internal reports, triggering an urgent review. When the executives opened his profile, their faces drained of color. Not only was he a first-class passenger, he was the founder of a billion-dollar cybersecurity empire that powered airport data systems, baggage tracking algorithms, and identity verification software used by their own airline. A man they had just insulted publicly was, in many ways, one of the people keeping their airline functional and secure. Panic spread fast. The head of customer relations ordered immediate intervention. Another executive called the airport manager, and a third began rehearsing apologies. Meanwhile, back on the plane, the same staff who had questioned him continued to operate as if nothing unusual was happening. They were unaware that the quiet man they had judged by his appearance was central to the airline's technological backbone. He sat alone in the waiting area, his demeanor calm, watching the situation unfold. He knew the revelation would come soon, but he wasn't seeking revenge. He wanted accountability and awareness, something deeper than just an apology. 15 minutes later, hurried footsteps echoed through the jet bridge as two senior airline executives arrived, breathless and visibly shaken. They bypassed passengers, ignored protocol, and made their way directly to the aircraft door. The crew stared in shock when they saw their badges directors don't appear at gates unless something catastrophic has happened. "Where is he?" one of them demanded, scanning the cabin. A flight attendant hesitated before pointing awkwardly toward the CEO, who sat quietly near the front, still waiting for permission to return to his seat. The executives approached him with a level of respect that sharply contrasted the earlier treatment. "Sir, we sincerely apologize," the director said, his voice trembling slightly. The crew exchanged confused glances, still unaware of his identity. Passengers looked up, sensing a major shift. The CEO simply nodded, his expression unreadable. The director explained that the airline had made a serious error and insisted the issue was being escalated to the board. They offered immediate reseating, assistance, and private accommodations, but he raised a hand gently, signaling them to pause. He wasn't looking for special treatment. He wanted recognition not of his wealth, but of his dignity, which had been dismissed without hesitation. The executives stood silently, waiting for him to respond. The flight crew shifted nervously, realization slowly sinking in. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, so controlled that it commanded attention from every corner of the cabin. He explained that he had experienced situations like this before. Moments when people judged him solely by his skin color, or assumed he didn't belong in the spaces he had worked tirelessly to reach. His words weren't bitter. They were honest, reflective, and painfully real. He told them he didn't mention his position earlier because he wanted to see how they would treat someone they thought had no power. "I don't want privilege," he said quietly. "I want fairness. I want respect." The director looked devastated. Flight attendants avoided his eyes, guilt etched across their faces. Passengers listened in uncomfortable silence, witnessing a reality many had never personally faced. The CEO emphasized that his company partnered with aviation authorities worldwide, and that he had come to this meeting to improve passenger safety and equality in travel experiences. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. His final line struck deep. If this is how you treat a paying customer, imagine how many others suffer in silence. The airline wasted no time launching a formal investigation. HR teams were notified, incident reports were collected, and every moment of the interaction was reviewed. Social media picked up whispers of the event, and within hours, entire threads emerged discussing discrimination in first-class spaces. News outlets contacted the airline, sensing an emerging scandal. To protect its reputation, the company issued a public apology, acknowledging procedural failure and bias-driven misjudgment. The crew involved were placed on mandatory training and disciplinary review. Corporate leadership initiated a complete overhaul of staff conduct policies, including new bias awareness programs. Analysts warned that mishandling the situation could jeopardize future partnerships, including potentially losing access to the billion-dollar technology platform his company provided. Meanwhile, the CEO quietly returned to his office, uninterested in publicizing the event. His focus wasn't revenge, it was change. And in the days that followed, several aviation regulators contacted him for advice on creating fairer, more equitable passenger treatment standards. What began as a moment of humiliation had now grown into a conversation that could reshape international airline culture. Beyond the corporate chaos, the incident carried a deeper, more universal message about judgment, inequality, and the quiet strength of staying composed under pressure. The CEO's experience reminded millions that discrimination isn't always loud. It often hides behind polite smiles, procedural checks, and subtle assumptions about who deserves access to privilege. His story spread online not because he was wealthy or powerful, but because he represented countless individuals who face similar situations daily, without the ability to make phone calls that shake corporations. His calm, thoughtful response demonstrated that dignity can be more powerful than anger, and that even silent endurance can expose systemic flaws. The airline's transformation, the industry-wide discussions, and the public support showed that change starts with awareness. His final reflection stayed with many. Power doesn't come from wealth. It comes from character, patience, and the courage to confront injustice without losing yourself. The incident became a case study in leadership and humility, proof that respect shouldn't be earned through status, but granted through simple humanity. In the end, his journey wasn't just about a seat in first class. It was about rewriting how the world treats those it underestimates. In the end, what happened on that flight became much bigger than a single misunderstanding or a single act of bias. It became a mirror forcing an entire industry to see what it had ignored for far too long. The CEO never demanded revenge, compensation, or special recognition. He simply wanted the truth to be acknowledged, that every human being, regardless of appearance, status, or background, deserves respect. His silent dignity spoke louder than any threat ever could. The airline rewrote policies, executives reconsidered their standards, and thousands of passengers around the world learned something from a story they were never supposed to witness. As the CEO walked away from the airport that day, he didn't look back with anger, he walked forward with purpose. Because true power isn't shown by raising your voice, but by raising the standard for how people should be treated. And sometimes, all it takes is one quiet moment of injustice to shake the world awake. Now the question remains, what would you do if someone tried to strip away your dignity? Would you fight back with anger, or with the kind of strength that changes everything? Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for more stories like this.